Before we begin this haunting tale from the dusty heart of the Old West, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss another forgotten story of mystery, legacy, and redemption. This one is unlike anything you've heard before. It's the kind of story that starts with a coffin and ends with a secret no one saw coming. A black rancher, known for his silence and strength, lived his days away from the noise of town. But when a coffin with no name arrived on his porch, the silence of his land was shattered forever. What was inside that box? Who sent it? And why did it contain something that belonged to him? Elijah Boone wasn't the kind of man who startled easily. He'd fought in wars, survived raids, buried more than a few friends, and carried the kind of pain that made lesser men tremble. His ranch, miles from town, was a place of self-imposed exile. Folks left him alone. And that's how he liked it. But that morning, when a rickety wagon pulled up without warning, dropped a coffin at his gate, and rode off without a word, something deep in Elijah's bones went cold. No letter. No markings. No explanation. Just a plain pine coffin, sealed shut, and calling to him. He didn't open it right away. He watched it for hours from his porch, as if expecting it to move. The sun beat down on the wood. The wind kicked up dust around it. Elijah just stared, cigar in hand, every nerve alert. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong that comes with death, the kind that comes with unfinished business. He'd seen plenty of caskets in his life, but none that arrived like this. Uninvited. Unexplained, and personal in a way that made his skin itch. When he finally pried open the lid, the smell of old pine and thyme rushed out. Inside, there was no body, no bones, just emptiness, and at the bottom, lying neatly folded, his old black hat. The same one he'd lost nearly 10 years ago. The one he'd worn the night his brother disappeared in the fire. Elijah's hands trembled as he reached for it. This wasn't just a warning. It was a message. From who, he didn't know. But someone was reaching into his past and pulling him back toward something he'd buried long ago. The hat was untouched, still shaped to his head, still carrying the faint scent of ash and saddle leather. Elijah sat down, staring at it in his lap, memories crashing in like a storm. That night, the flames, the betrayal, and his brother Isaiah, the last person to wear that hat before vanishing into the smoke. No one ever found the body. No grave was dug. Just silence, rumors, and Elijah, left to carry the guilt like a stone in his chest. The town had moved on, claimed Isaiah had joined a gang, said Elijah let him die. But Elijah knew better. He saw the way Isaiah looked at him that night, like he knew something Elijah didn't. And then he was gone. Now, 10 years later, the hat was back, in a coffin, on Elijah's porch. It wasn't just eerie. It was deliberate. Someone wanted him to remember. Or maybe to finish something he started. He spent the night by the fire, hat in hand, eyes never leaving the coffin. He didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every sound outside made him reach for his rifle. Every creak in the wood felt like footsteps returning. But nothing came. Just wind, coyotes, and the heavy silence of the plains. Until sunrise, when he noticed something scratched into the coffin's side that hadn't been there before. For words, "Come to Dead Man's Rise." Dead Man's Rise was a cliffside 3 days north, past the canyons, where no one went anymore. Bandits, rattlesnakes, ghost stories. It was a place only fools or desperate men ventured into. Elijah hadn't been there since he was a boy. Since the night his father was killed over a cattle dispute. And yet, as he stared at the words carved into the wood, he knew, whoever sent that coffin wanted him to return there. Not for vengeance. Not for closure, but for truth. He packed his saddlebags by noon. Canned beans, water, a spare pistol, and the hat, now resting on his head like it never left. He didn't leave a note, didn't lock the door. He figured if he didn't come back, there'd be no one left to care. The ranch would rot, like everything else he'd touched. But deep down, something inside him burned. Not fear, not anger, purpose. For the first time in years, he had a trail to follow, even if it led straight into the past. As the sun set behind him, Elijah rode north. The landscape shifted from dry plains to jagged rock. His horse, Dust, was nervous. The air grew heavier. The temperature dropped. And the shadows stretched longer than they should have. He passed the old broken fence where Isaiah once carved his name. And he didn't look away. Because whatever waited at Dead Man's Rise, it already knew he was coming. On the second day of riding, Elijah spotted strange markers. Not natural, man-made. Sticks arranged like arrows. Stones stacked in pyramids. Someone had been here. Recently. And they wanted him to see it. The signs weren't leading him astray, they were guiding him in. He followed them without question, his instincts sharper than ever. Whoever orchestrated this wasn't sloppy. They knew Elijah would come. They knew how to get in his head. And it was working. That night, he made camp near a dried riverbed. The stars were blinding above him, but his thoughts were louder than the night. He kept the hat close, turning it in his hands like a puzzle piece. And then, just before sleep took him, he heard it, a whistle. High-pitched. Familiar. The same tune Isaiah used to hum when he was nervous. Elijah grabbed his rifle, heart pounding. But there was no one there. Just the wind, brushing past the rocks like an old friend. The final leg of the journey brought him to the base of Dead Man's Rise. The cliffs towered above him, jagged like broken teeth. There was a path, barely visible, etched into the stone. He tied Dust to a tree and climbed. Step by step. One breath at a time. And when he reached the top, there it was, a second coffin. Smaller. Older. Covered in dust and wrapped in chain. It was waiting for him like a forgotten promise. Carved into the lid was a name. Elijah Boone. Not Isaiah. Not anyone else. His name. Elijah stood frozen. The air around him turned cold. His pulse slowed. What kind of message was this? Was it a threat? A warning? Or something else? He dropped to his knees, hand trembling as he touched the wood. It was real. This wasn't a dream. Someone had prepared a grave for him, and it wasn't empty. He broke the chains open with his boot heel. Lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in an old military coat, was a photograph. Him and Isaiah, arms around each other, smiling in front of the barn before it burned. Behind it, a map, with a trail marked in red. At the bottom of the map, one word was written, truth. Elijah didn't know whether to cry or scream. The past wasn't just catching up to him, it was dragging him back. As he studied the map, a voice cut through the air. You finally made it. Elijah spun, rifle raised. From behind a boulder stepped a man he hadn't seen in a decade. Beard longer. Face older. But the eyes, they were Isaiah's. Not a ghost. Not a dream. His brother. Alive. What the hell is this? Elijah demanded, fury and confusion crashing into each other. Why now? Why all this? Isaiah held up his hands. Because the fire wasn't an accident. And because I couldn't let you die not knowing the truth. He pointed to the map. They tried to kill both of us that night. But I made a deal. A bad one. And I disappeared to protect you. Isaiah explained everything. The land dispute. The ambush. The marshal who betrayed them. He'd been living under a different name, hiding in the mountains, watching from afar. He sent the hat. The coffin. The clues. All to bring Elijah here, where the final piece could be revealed. They buried more than just lies, brother, Isaiah said. They buried our father's legacy. Elijah dropped his rifle. The weight of it all crushed his chest. He wanted to punch Isaiah, hug him, curse him, thank him, but he said nothing, just breathed. For the first time in years, something in him broke, not in pain, but in release. Isaiah stepped forward. You ready to finish this? And Elijah nodded. Let's dig up the truth. Together, they turned back toward the cliff's edge. Below them, the land stretched wide and dark, full of secrets waiting to be unearthed. But the Boone brothers were ready. Together again. Two ghosts in the wild, heading home, not to bury the past, but to expose it. And somewhere, far off in the wind, came that whistle again. This time, it wasn't lonely. The trail on the map led them deep into a canyon rarely crossed by any man alive. Dust clung to their boots, and vultures circled high overhead as if sensing the blood still buried in the rocks below. The land whispered, and every step felt like treading on bones. The deeper they went, the colder it got. Not from temperature, from memory. Every tree, every stone, felt familiar to Elijah, like walking through a dream he didn't want to remember. The canyon walls began to close in, and Isaiah stopped suddenly, pointing to a rusted metal plaque jutting from the dirt. It read, Boone Ranch, claimed by order of Marshal G. W. Trent, 1865. Elijah's blood boiled. The very man who had sworn to protect their family had stolen everything. Isaiah led him behind the plaque, where a collapsed shack still held together by rusted nails and willpower marked the heart of their old family land. They entered cautiously, and Isaiah pulled a loose board from the floor. Beneath it was a leather-bound journal. It was their father's. Inside were records of land ownership, letters from nearby tribes affirming his peace treaties, and one final note dated the night of his murder. If anything happens to me, trust no lawman. Hide the deed. Isaiah looked at Elijah, eyes fierce. They thought they burned everything. But this is the truth they tried to bury. And Elijah felt the fire in his chest reignite. They left the shack under cover of night, making their way back toward town. But the moment they reached the outskirts, they knew eyes were already on them. The sheriff's star gleamed under lantern light, and behind him, the sons of the men who betrayed their family. Elijah Boone, the sheriff called. You should have stayed gone. Elijah stepped forward, hat low, rifle strapped. I came back for what's mine. What was stolen? Isaiah stood beside him. Two silhouettes against a town that had forgotten them, or tried to. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. And tonight, it came knocking. The town gathered slowly, murmurs rising as more people recognized the Boone brothers. Old men crossed themselves. Women pulled children inside. The sheriff raised his voice, accusing them of forgery, trespassing, everything but murder. But Elijah pulled out the journal, holding it high. This is my father's land. These are his words. And this town owes us more than silence. Gasps rose from the crowd. A few of the elders exchanged looks. One even wept. Because they knew. They had always known. And now, the truth was no longer just a whisper on the wind. It was thunder. Gunfire erupted when the sheriff reached for his weapon. Elijah dove behind a barrel. Isaiah returned fire, hitting a post inches from the sheriff's face. Chaos exploded, dust flying, windows shattering. But the town didn't side with the law. Men stepped out with hunting rifles. Women armed with pitchforks. A few townsfolk took Elijah's side. And just like that, the past and present collided in a storm of reckoning. When the dust settled, the sheriff lay on the ground, disarmed, breathing heavy. Elijah stood over him. Tell your boys, Boone land's ours again. And we're not leaving. The next morning, the sun rose over a different town. One that no longer whispered lies but stood in silent awe of the truth that had surfaced. Isaiah nailed the deed to the church door, proof for all to see. And Elijah saddled dust once again, but not to run. He rode through town with his head high, the journal under one arm and Isaiah riding beside him. And for the first time in years, people didn't turn away. They nodded. They knew who the Boones were. And they remembered. Justice had returned to the West. They rebuilt the ranch on the hilltop. Not for profit, not for pride, but as a promise that no lie, no theft, no betrayal would ever erase what was rightfully theirs. The land sang again. Horses ran free, and children laughed in fields where once only silence lived. Isaiah took to teaching, Elijah to fencing the land. And every week they rode into town together, not as ghosts of the past, but as living legends. And the coffin? Elijah turned it into a bench, because some endings are meant to be sat on, not buried. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Isaiah lit a lantern by the barn and said, "I never thought I'd see home again." Elijah nodded. Home ain't just where you live. It's where the truth can breathe. They didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. The wind carried their story farther than any gunshot ever could. And far off in the canyons, where vultures once circled, wildflowers began to bloom. Because even the deadest land can grow again, if watered with justice. Legends say that on certain nights, you can still hear a whistle on the wind near Dead Man's Rise. A soft tune, carried by two brothers who never gave up on truth. And if you follow that sound, you'll find the path. Not to treasure, not to fame, but to legacy. The kind built with grit, grief, and a fire no lawman could extinguish. So if you ever find yourself lost in the dust of a forgotten town, remember this. Some stories were never meant to stay buried. And some men ride not for revenge, but for redemption. Now, if this tale gripped you, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with someone who loves a good Western that hits harder than a .45 Colt. Because out here, the truth rides faster than any bullet. And the Boones will always ride at dawn.